A little girl with $5 was trying to buy a cake for her mother when a single father saw her and recognized something familiar in her face. What happened changed their lives forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The sky filled with grey clouds perfectly mirrored the mood in Maple Grove that Tuesday in March. The first drops of hesitant rain began to mark the sidewalks of Maple Grove when Sophie Miller, only 8 years old, cautiously crossed Harmony Street, tightly holding a small, worn leather wallet. Her small, delicate fingers obsessively counted the coins that jingled softly with each step. $1, 2 50-cent coins, 3 25-cent coins. Exactly $5 she had saved over 2 weeks selling colorful drawings to her classmates. Bella Vista Bakery, with its faded yellow facade and intermittently flickering neon sign, exuded the unmistakable aroma of freshly baked baguettes and freshly brewed coffee. Sophie stopped in front of the fogged-up window, wiping a small circle on the glass with the sleeve of her navy blue school uniform to better observe the cakes on display. Her brown eyes sparkled. With impressive determination for someone so young, as she mentally calculated which would be the biggest cake she could buy for her mother's birthday the next day. "Good morning, Mrs. Julia," Sophie said with a melodic voice, pushing open the heavy wooden door that creaked as it opened. The golden bell hanging on the doorframe announced her entrance with a cheerful jingle. Mrs. Julia, a robust Italian woman in her 60s, with grey hair tied up in a messy bun and a floral apron stained with flour, smiled widely upon seeing the girl, her calloused hands from decades of kneading bread and decorating cakes moved automatically to arrange some pastries on the tray near the counter. "My little darling, how are you today? And your mum, how is she?" Mrs. Julia asked in her Portuguese, heavily accented with Italian, which she had never lost even after 40 years in America. "Mum is working at the Grand Hotel since early morning," Sophie replied, approaching the glass counter where the cakes were displayed like small works of art. "Tomorrow is her birthday, and I wanted to buy a special cake. I have $5 here," she said, opening her wallet and proudly showing her savings. Mrs. Julia felt her heart tighten. She knew well the story of Carla Miller, Sophie's mother, a 26-year-old young woman who worked as a housekeeper at the Grand Hotel during the morning, cleaned offices in the afternoon, and still cooked snacks to sell to neighbors at night. A silent warrior raising her daughter alone in a rented 2-room house on Maple Street, where the rent consumed more than half of her monthly income. $5, huh?" Mrs. Julia murmured, pretending to think seriously. "Let me see what I can do for you, my treasure." It was at that precise moment that the bakery door opened again, this time with much more force. A tall man, around 40 years old, entered, shaking off the first drops of rain from his dark grey overcoat. David Johnson had the imposing presence of someone used to leading meetings in boardrooms, with broad shoulders that perfectly filled his impeccably tailored suit and black hair with some silver strands at the temples that gave him a distinguished air. David stopped abruptly upon seeing Sophie. There was something in the delicate profile of the girl, in the soft curve of her small nose, and especially in her expressive brown eyes, that made him feel an inexplicable shiver run down his spine. For a few seconds he stood frozen, watching the child as if he were seeing a ghost from the past. "Can I help you, sir?" Mrs. Julia asked, noticing the confused expression of the well-dressed man who remained standing near the entrance. I'm sorry," David stammered, forcing himself to snap out of the trance. "A double espresso, please." Sophie turned curiously to observe the stranger who was staring at her. There was no fear in her eyes, just the natural curiosity of an intelligent child who realized she was being watched. David felt embarrassed and tried to disguise it by taking his phone from the inner pocket of his jacket and pretending to check important messages. "So, Sophie," Mrs. Julia said, turning back to the girl, "how about this chocolate cake here? It's small but very tasty. It usually costs $8, but for you—" She paused theatrically. "$5 is great." Sophie's eyes lit up like stars. "Really, Mrs. Julia, it's beautiful. Mom will be so happy." David discreetly observed the transaction, noting how the Italian woman was clearly doing a special favor for the child. There was something touching in the girl's determination to buy a gift for her mother with her little savings that reminded him of his own daughter Emily at the same age. The difference was striking. Emily had always had everything she wanted, while this girl was struggling to buy a simple birthday cake. "Here's your coffee, sir," Mrs. Julia said, placing the white porcelain cup on the counter. "Sugar is over there on the table." "Thank you," David murmured, still watching Sophie, who was now patiently waiting while Mrs. Julia carefully wrapped the cake in golden paper. "Mrs. Julia," Sophie said hesitantly, "could you write 'Happy Birthday, Mom' on the cake? I know it's asking a lot, but—" "Of course, darling. I'll use my best handwriting," Mrs. Julia replied, picking up a small tube of pink icing. David felt something stir in his chest, the simplicity of the request, the genuine gratitude of the child, and especially those familiar features he couldn't get out of his head, left him disturbed. He decided he needed to find out more about that girl. "Excuse me," David said, stepping closer to the counter. "I couldn't help but notice. Have you known each other for a long time?" Mrs. Julia looked suspiciously at the well-dressed stranger. "Sophie is like a granddaughter to me. I met her when she was just a baby, when her mom arrived in the neighborhood." "I see," David murmured, taking a sip of the strong coffee. "And do you live nearby?" "Sir," interrupted Sophie, with the surprising maturity of someone who learned to be cautious, "my mum taught me not to talk to strangers about where we live." David smiled, impressed by the girl's intelligence. "You're right. I apologize for my indiscretion." Julia finished, decorating the cake, and handed the wrapped package to Sophie. "All set, sweetheart. Your mum will love it." "Thank you so much, Mrs. Julia. You're so kind to me." Sophie gave the Italian woman a warm hug and headed for the door. "Wait," David said impulsively, pulling out his wallet. "Let me pay for the cake." "You don't have to, sir," Sophie replied politely. "I saved this money from working. It's important that I pay for my mom's gift myself." David was even more impressed by the girl's dignity. "Working, you?" "I draw and sell at school," Sophie explained proudly. "I draw houses, buildings, bridges, things I see in the city." The girl's words hit David like a lightning bolt. Architecture. The child had an interest in architecture. And those eyes, that profile. A hazy memory began to form in his mind, a recollection from long ago that he couldn't quite define. "How interesting," he murmured, watching her leave the bakery with the wrapped cake held close to her chest. Julia noticed the man's thoughtful expression. "She's a special child, this Sophie. Very smart, very determined." David paid for the coffee and left the bakery without saying anything more. But with the certainty that he would return the next day, there was something about that girl, something that had awakened a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. As he walked down Harmony Street toward the office, he couldn't shake the image of those expressive brown eyes and the unsettling feeling that he had seen them before, somewhere distant in his memory. The rain from the previous night had washed the streets of Maple Grove, leaving the air fresher and filled with the scent of wet earth rising from the pavement. David had woken up at 5 in the morning with the image of Sophie etched in his mind, an unease he couldn't explain taking over his thoughts. For the first time in months, he decided to change his morning routine, swapping the gym for a walk to the bakery. At 7:15 in the morning, David pushed open the door of Bella Vista, the same golden bell announcing his arrival. Julia was behind the counter organizing fresh baguettes in wicker baskets, and she looked up, surprised to see him again. "Twice in 2 days?" she commented with a sly smile. "The coffee here must be really good." "Actually," David hesitated, feeling slightly embarrassed. "I was curious about the girl from yesterday. Sophie, right?" Julia stopped what she was doing and studied him carefully. Her experienced eyes, having seen much in life, sensed something beyond mere curiosity in the man before her. "Sir, with all due respect," Julia said, crossing her arms, "why would a man like you be interested in a child you barely know?" "I know it sounds strange," David admitted, running a hand through his hair, "but there's something familiar about her, something I can't explain." "Familiar how?" "The eyes, mainly, and the profile. Reminds me of someone." Julia continued to observe him cautiously. 40 years living in Brazil had taught her to be wary of strangers, especially well-dressed men showing interest in poor children. "Who do you think she resembles?" David sighed deeply. "I'm not sure. Maybe someone from my family, from the past." At that moment the door opened and Sophie rushed in, breathless with her school backpack hanging off one shoulder. Her brown hair was messy and she wore a radiant smile on her face. "Mrs. Julia! Mrs. Julia!" she shouted excitedly, bouncing up to the counter. "Mom loved the cake. She even cried with emotion when she saw it." "That's wonderful, little girl," Julia replied, breaking into a maternal smile. "And was her birthday nice?" "It was the best birthday of her life," Sophie said, opening her backpack. "Look what she gave me to show you." Sophie pulled an old cell phone from her backpack and showed a picture on the small, scratched screen. In the image, a young brunette with delicate features was blowing out a solitary candle stuck in a chocolate cake, tears shining in her eyes. Even in the pixelated photo, the striking resemblance between mother and daughter was evident. David felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. That face, those eyes, a long-buried memory began to emerge from the depths of his mind, like a photograph slowly being developed. "Your mom is very beautiful," David commented, stepping closer discreetly. "She's the most beautiful woman in the world," Sophie replied proudly. "And the hardest working too. Yesterday she worked late and still made sure to celebrate with me." "What time did she get home?" David asked, trying to sound casual. Sophie looked at him suspiciously. "Why do you want to know?" Julia quickly intervened. "Sophie, do you need to buy anything today, or did you just come to show me the picture?" "Actually, I need 2 baguettes for school lunch," Sophie said, putting her cell phone away. "Mom left $1.50. As Julia prepared the lunch, David discreetly observed Sophie. The girl took out a school notebook from her backpack and began to draw absent-mindedly while she waited. The pencil moved confidently in her small hands, creating precise and proportional lines. "Can I see what you're drawing?" David asked. Sophie hesitated, but then turned the notebook in his direction. The drawing was extraordinary for an 8-year-old. Detailed architectural design of a 2-story house, perfectly proportioned windows, and even landscaping indications. "My God," David murmured, genuinely impressed. "Where did you learn to draw like this?" "No one taught me," Sophie replied, blushing slightly. "I like to observe the buildings in the city and try to draw them my way." David examined Sophie, studied the drawing more closely, and felt a chill run down her spine. The style, the proportions, even the shading technique, everything reminded her of her own drawings when she was a child. It was as if she were looking at her old school notebooks. "David," he said carefully, "may I ask what your mother's full name is?" The girl abruptly closed her notebook. "Why do you want to know so much about my family?" "David," Mrs. Julia interrupted firmly, "I think it's best if you finish your coffee and leave the girl alone. David realized he had crossed a line. "You're right. I apologize, Sophie. I didn't mean to bother you." Sophie picked up the wrapped baguettes and headed for the door, but stopped before leaving. "Sir, are you an architect?" The question caught David off guard. "How do you know?" "The way you looked at my drawing. And your hands. They're always clean but have little smudges of graphite on the side. Just like my math teacher, who also draws." David smiled, once again impressed by the girl's keen perception. "You're very observant." "Mom always says that observing people helps you understand them better," Sophie replied. "Goodbye, Mrs. Julia. Goodbye, architect." After Sophie left, a heavy silence filled the bakery. Julia continued arranging the baguettes, but David could feel her disapproving gaze. "Would you like to explain what's going on here?" Mrs. Julia finally asked. David sat at one of the small tables, near the window, watching Sophie cross the street towards school. "Julia, can I trust you?" "That depends on what you have to say." "That girl, she reminds me of someone in my family, someone I haven't seen in a long time." "Who?" David took a deep breath. "About 15 years ago, when I still lived at my parents' house on the south side, we had a staff member, a young housekeeper. She took care of the house and sometimes looked after me when my parents traveled." Julia stopped working and turned fully towards him. This housekeeper had a little girl who sometimes came to work with her, a tiny baby, just a few months old, with huge brown eyes and a cry that sounded like music. And one day, they just disappeared. My father said the housekeeper was fired for theft, but I never believed that version. She was an honest, hard-working woman. What was her name? David closed his eyes, forcing his memory. "I don't remember the full name. I know we called her Carlina. Or was it Carla?" Julia felt the blood freeze in her veins. "Mr. David, I need you to leave my bakery now." "What? Why?" "Because if you're telling the truth, then this story is much more complicated than it seems. And if you're lying—" Julia held a wooden spoon as if it were a weapon. "I'm not lying." "Then you need to find out the whole truth before you get close to that child again," Julia said firmly. "Because if Carla Mendes is who I think she is, then you have much more in common than you realize." David felt his heart race. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that maybe Sophie isn't just familiar to you by chance," Julia replied, turning her back to him. "And now, please leave. I need to think." David left the bakery with his mind in turmoil, more confused than when he entered. Julia's words echoed in his head. "You have much more in common than you realize." What did she mean by that? As he walked through the busy streets towards the office, David couldn't stop thinking about Sophie's drawing, the face of her mother in the photo, and the growing feeling that his life was about to change completely. David spent the next 3 days in a state of increasing restlessness. At Schmidt and Associates, an architecture firm located in a modern building on Oscar Freire Street, he found himself unable to concentrate on the project spread out on his glass desk. The technical drawings of a residential complex in Brookhaven seemed blurred before his eyes as his mind obsessively returned to the bakery and to Sophie. On Thursday morning, after a restless night, David made a decision that would change everything. He called his secretary, Mariana, and asked her to cancel all morning meetings. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to start looking. The attic of the old Johnson family mansion in High Pines was dusty and silent like a mausoleum. David had inherited the property after his parents died in a car accident 5 years earlier, but he avoided visiting the house whenever possible. Many painful memories inhabited those marble corridors and rooms decorated with antique furniture. Using the key he had kept on his keychain for years, David opened the heavy oak door and immediately felt the familiar smell of furniture wax and melancholy that always characterized the residence. He climbed the stairs to the attic, where his mother used to keep documents, old photos, and everything she considered too important to throw away, but not important enough to keep in sight. The attic was filled with cardboard boxes labeled in the meticulous handwriting of Dolores Johnson: tax documents, 1990, 1995, family photos, correspondence, staff. It was the last box that caught David's attention. With his hands trembling slightly, he opened the box and found dozens of folders organized chronologically. Employment contracts, references, photographs of staff at family events, letters of recommendation. His mother had kept everything with the obsession for order that always characterized her. David flipped through the documents until he found a folder dated 2008-2010. His fingers stopped on an employment contract that made his heart race. Carla Regina Mendes da Silva, housekeeper and domestic caregiver. "My God," he murmured, reading the document carefully. There were all the details: social security number, address at the time, references. David continued searching and found photographs that his mother had taken during a Christmas party in 2009. In one of the images, Caroline was holding baby Sophie, both next to an elderly woman with grey hair, wearing an embroidered apron. The caption on the back of the photo, written by Dolores herself, read, "Caroline, Sophie, and Rose. Christmas 2009. His hands trembled as he held the photograph. Rose. That name echoed in his mind like a distant bell. He vaguely remembered an older employee who had worked for his family for many years, decades before Caroline. A quiet and efficient woman who knew all the secrets of the house. David continued rummaging through the box until he found an even older folder marked Rose, 1985-2005. Inside, dozens of documents revealed a story that left him in shock. Rose Johnson had worked for the family for 20 years, since David was just a 15-year-old teenager. But the document that disturbed him the most was a handwritten letter dated December 2009 with the official letterhead of a public hospital. Mrs. Dolores Johnson, as requested, please find attached the medical results for Rose Johnson, our employee. We regret to inform you that the diagnosis is advanced stage pancreatic cancer. The prognosis is guarded, with a life expectancy of 6 months to 1 year. Rose expressly requested that the family not be informed of the severity of her condition until she could make the necessary arrangements for the care of her granddaughter. Sincerely, Dr. Marcus Smith, City Hospital. David sat heavily in an old chair, trying to process the information. Rose had hidden her terminal illness to protect her granddaughter, and according to the dates, she had died in March 2010, exactly when Caroline and Sophie disappeared from their lives. But there was more. At the bottom of the folder, David found a sealed envelope with his own name written in shaky handwriting. With fingers that could barely function, he opened the envelope and found a 4-page handwritten letter. My dear David, if you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer in this world and that you have finally discovered the truth I have kept for all these years. I ask that you read until the end before judging anything. Caroline is not just my granddaughter. She is your sister. Your father, John Johnson, had a relationship with my daughter Caroline between 1996 and 1997. When Caroline became pregnant, he promised to leave his wife and take responsibility for the family they were creating. But when you started having problems in school and your mother discovered the affair, John came to me in desperation. Caroline died in childbirth due to complications that could have been avoided if she had access to a private hospital. John paid for the procedures, but it was too late. Caroline was born an orphan, and John, overwhelmed by guilt and the fear of destroying his legitimate family, decided it would be better if she grew up away from you. I agreed to raise her as if she were my granddaughter, in exchange for him ensuring that she would never go without. For 18 years, John kept his word, sending money monthly for Caroline's education and upbringing. When he brought Caroline to work in his house in 2008, it was because John was ill and could no longer help financially. He wanted to meet his daughter before he died, but he never had the courage to reveal the truth. Caroline grew up believing that John was just a generous employer who cared about her well-being. John died in January 2010, taking the secret to the grave. A few days later, when I discovered that I was also dying, I made the hardest decision of my life, to tell Caroline the truth and ask her to leave the house before anyone discovered the family connection. Caroline was devastated to learn that she was the illegitimate daughter of John Johnson and that you were her half-brother. She felt betrayed by our entire family, by John, who never acknowledged her, by me, who hid the truth, and especially by you, whom she believed despised her. When Dolores discovered the medical tests and began to suspect that I was hiding something, Caroline panicked. She was afraid that if the truth were revealed, Sophie would be rejected just as she had been. So she fled in the early morning, taking only the clothes on her back and Sophie's birth certificate. David, I know this revelation must be a terrible shock for you, but you need to know that Caroline is a good, honest, and hard-working young woman. She did not flee out of malice, but out of fear and pain. Sophie is your niece, and she is a special child, as intelligent as you were at the same age. I ask that if you ever find them again, do not judge them for what they did. Judge them for who they are. Your family, with love and regret, Rose Johnson. David finished reading the letter with tears streaming down his face. His hands trembled so much that he could barely hold the paper. Everything made sense now. The physical resemblance between him and Sophie, the girl's natural talent for drawing, Caroline's defensive reaction when she was a child. Caroline was his sister, Sophie was his niece, and he had spent the last 15 years unaware that he had family out there, struggling to survive while he lived a privileged life. David put all the documents in a folder and descended the stairs of the mansion with heavy steps. He needed to see Sophie again. He needed to find Carla and tell the truth. But first, he had to discover where they lived. Mrs. Julia knew more than she had revealed. This was clear now, and he would return to the bakery, this time armed with the truth that would change all their lives forever. The Friday morning was one of those trendy cafes that had spread across Maple Grove, with exposed brick walls, hanging plants, and a clientele mainly composed of local advertisers and artists. David had chosen that place deliberately, a neutral environment where Mrs. Julia would feel more comfortable talking. He had called the bakery the previous morning, asking to meet her after work. Mrs. Julia arrived promptly at 7 in the evening, still wearing a floral apron under a grey wool coat. Her experienced eyes scanned the room before locating David, who was sitting at a table in the back, a brown folder on the table and 2 cups of coffee already ordered. "Mr. David," she said, sitting down cautiously, "I hope you have a good explanation for this meeting." "I do," David replied, pushing the folder in her direction. "I found this in the basement of my parents' house." Mrs. Julia opened the folder, and her eyes widened upon seeing the letter from Rose. She read silently, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly with each paragraph. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed deeply. "Madonna mia," she murmured in Italian. "Rose told me there was a secret, but I never imagined it was this." "So you knew Rose?" "Of course I knew her. She came to the bakery every week to buy sweet rolls for her employer, always polite, always worried about her granddaughter." Mrs. Julia gently touched the photograph of Rose with Carla and Sophie. When she died, Carla showed up at my bakery the next day, desperate, carrying a baby and a small suitcase. She was crying so much she could hardly speak, and you helped her. What would you do if a 19-year-old girl showed up at your door with a child in her arms and nowhere to go? Mrs. Julia looked at him firmly. I gave her the address of a budget inn here in the neighborhood and offered her a part-time job helping at the bakery. David felt a pang of guilt. Why didn't she reach out to our family? Why didn't she tell the truth? Because Rose made Carla promise never to reveal the secret. Mrs. Julia explained. Rose said her family would reject her, that they would say she was an opportunist trying to take advantage of the situation. And after everything she went through, well, Carla believed it. What did she go through? What do you mean? Mrs. Julia hesitated, as if debating internally how much to reveal. Carla grew up believing she was an orphan. Rose made up a story about her parents dying in an accident. When she found out the truth, that her father had been alive all along and never wanted to meet her. Mrs. Julia shook her head. Sadly, it broke the girl's heart. David absorbed the information in silence. He imagined his sister at 19, discovering that she had grown up her entire life based on lies, that she had a family that never knew of her existence. "Where are they living now?" he finally asked. "Why do you want to know?" "Because she is my sister, Mrs. Julia, and Sophie is my niece. They are my family." "Family?" Mrs. Julia laughed bitterly. "Where was that family for the last 15 years? Do you know how many jobs Carla had to take to raise Sophie on her own? Do you know how many nights she spent sleepless, worrying about how she would pay the rent?" David felt the weight of guilt increase. "I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know. None of you wanted to know. That's not fair. How could I know something that was hidden from me my whole life?" Mrs. Julia studied him for a long moment. "What do you intend to do now that you know the truth?" "I want to meet my sister. I want to help them." "Help them how? With money? Carla doesn't want charity." "Mr. David, she has pride. I'm not talking about charity, I'm talking about family. And you think she will just accept you with open arms after everything?" David didn't have an answer for that. In fact, he didn't even know how to approach Carla when he found her, how to start a conversation with a sister who didn't know she existed until a week ago. "Mrs. Julia," he said after a moment, "I need you to help me. I need to meet Carla properly, explain the situation. And Sophie? Have you thought about Sophie? She's just a little girl. How will you explain to her that you are her uncle?" "I don't know," David admitted, "but I know I want to be part of her life. I want her to have the opportunities she deserves." Mrs. Julia was silent for several minutes, watching the street activity through the cafe window. Finally, she turned to David with a serious expression. "I'll give you a chance, just one chance, but we will do it my way." "What do you mean?" "Tomorrow is Saturday. Carla always brings Sophie to the bakery around 10 in the morning to buy sweet rolls for afternoon coffee. You will be there, but you won't identify yourself immediately. You will observe, you will talk naturally, and when I judge it to be the right moment, I will tell Carla who you are myself." David nodded, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness. "But there's one condition," Mrs. Julia continued firmly. "If Carla says she doesn't want to talk to you, you will respect her decision and never bother them again. Understood?" "Understood." "And one more thing, you will treat Carla as an equal, not as a beneficiary of your charity. She may be poor, but she is intelligent, dignified, and an exceptional mother. She deserves respect." "Of course." Mrs. Julia picked up the folder with the documents and stood up. "Then until tomorrow, Mr. David, and pray that this works out, because if you hurt those two, you will have to deal with me." After Mrs. Julia left, David sat alone in the cafe, watching the nighttime activity of Maple Grove. Through the window, young people walked the streets in groups, laughing loudly and seeming carefree about the future. He tried to remember the last time he felt that way, free, light, without the burden of family, secrets and responsibilities. He thought of Emily, his 17-year-old daughter, who was spending the weekend at a friend's house. How would she react to discovering that she had an aunt and a cousin she never knew existed? And how would he explain that her grandfather had kept a secret family for years? More importantly, how would Carla react to seeing him? Would there be anger, resentment, or perhaps just indifference? David would find out in a few hours, and the prospect made him more nervous than any important presentation at the office. He paid the bill and slowly walked back to the car, the nighttime sounds of Maple Grove echoing around him. In less than 24 hours, his life would change completely once again, and this time he was determined to do the right thing. Saturday dawned with a clear blue sky and the characteristic bustle of Maple Grove on weekends. David had arrived at the bakery at 9:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before the agreed time, and now found himself sitting at a table near the window, pretending to read a newspaper while observing every person passing by on the sidewalk. Mrs. Julia moved through the establishment with her usual efficiency, but David could sense the tension in her movements. She had prepared a special table near the counter with 2 extra seats, just in case any acquaintances showed up, as she discreetly explained. At 10:05 in the morning, the bakery door swung open and Sophie rushed in, as always, followed by a young woman who made David's heart stop for a few seconds. Carla Miller was 26 years old and carried the understated beauty of someone who learned to go unnoticed. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore faded jeans with a light blue blouse that highlighted her eyes the same color as Sophie's. There was something in her walk, an upright posture that contrasted with her simple clothes, that conveyed dignity despite the circumstances. "Mrs. Julia," Sophie ran to the counter. "Mum said I can choose 2 pastries today because she got an extra job this week." "That's great, little girl," replied Mrs. Julia, but her eyes were fixed on Carla, who was approaching more slowly. "Good morning, Julia," Carla said in a soft voice, but David detected a note of fatigue in it. "How have you been?" "Well, my dear, and you? You look better than last week." Carla smiled, and David felt something stir in his chest. It was the same smile he saw in the mirror every morning, the same curve of the lips that characterized the Miller family. "I picked up some extra jobs, nothing too glamorous, but it will help pay for Sophie's art school next semester." "Art school?" Sophie turned, surprised. "Mom, what art school?" Carla blushed slightly. "I wanted it to be a surprise, sweetheart. I spoke with a teacher who said you have a lot of talent for a drawing. She knows of a school nearby that offers scholarships for underprivileged children." David observed the interaction between mother and daughter, noticing how Carla was striving to give her daughter opportunities she never had. There was something touching in the young woman's silent determination. "Can I see Sophie's drawings again?" David asked, casually approaching the counter. Carla turned to look at him, and David felt as if he had been punched. Up close, the resemblance between them was even more striking. They had the same eyes, the same jawline, even the same small scar on the chin that David had gotten at 5 years old from falling off his bike. "You're the man who was here last week," Carla said, recognizing him. There was caution in her voice. "Yes, David Miller." He extended his hand, and when Carla shook it, he felt an electric shock run through his arm. It was like shaking hands with his own reflection. "Carla Miller," she replied, but continued to watch him closely. "Sophie told me you asked a lot of questions about our family." "I apologize if I seemed intrusive," David said carefully. "It's just that your daughter reminds me of someone." "Who?" "David." glanced at Mrs. Julia, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Actually, she reminds me of myself when I was a child. Carla furrowed her brow. What do you mean? Mrs. Julia stepped closer and gently touched Carla's shoulder. My dear, I think you should sit down. I have something important to tell you. Julia, you're scaring me. Please sit down. Carla sat at the table Mrs. Julia had prepared, instinctively holding Sophie in her lap. David sat across from the table, his eyes meeting Carla's. Carla, Mrs. Julia began gently, Mr. David brought some documents that you need to see. David opened the folder he had brought and placed the letter from Rose on the table. I found this in the attic of my parents' house. It's a letter from your grandmother, addressed to me. Carla took the letter with trembling hands and read it silently. David watched her expression change gradually, surprise, then shock, then a deep pain that broke his heart. This can't be true, she whispered, finishing reading. I checked all the documents, David said softly. The dates match, the names match. Carla, you are my sister. Sophie, who had remained quiet in her mother's lap, looked confused between the two adults. Mom, what's happening? Carla hugged her daughter tighter, as if wanting to protect her from yet another devastating revelation. I don't know, my love. I don't know. I know this must be a shock, David continued, but I want you to know that I spent all these years not knowing you existed. If I had known... If you had known what? Carla interrupted him, her voice heavy with emotion. Would you have accepted me as open arms, a bastard sister, daughter of the housekeeper? Yes, David replied without hesitation. Yes, I would have. Carla studied him intently, searching for signs of insincerity. And now? What do you want from us now? I want to meet you. I want to meet my niece. I want to be part of your family. Why? Out of pity? No, because you are my family, the only family I have left. Sophie broke the tense silence. So, you are my uncle? David smiled for the first time since entering the bakery. Yes, Sophie, I am your uncle. And you have a daughter? I do. Her name is Emily. She's 17 and, well, she is your cousin. Sophie looked at Carla. Mom, do we have family? Carla closed her eyes, fighting back tears. I don't know, my love. I need to think. Carla, David said gently, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything after all these years, but I would really like to talk to you, alone, to explain the situation better. I don't know if I want to hear explanations. Then just let me meet you. Let me try to be the brother I should have been all these years. Julia, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Carla, dear, maybe this is an opportunity for both of you. Carla looked around the bakery, at Julia, at David, at Sophie. Her mind was clearly racing in 1,000 different directions. If I agree to talk to you, I want to make one thing clear. I don't need charity. Sophie and I have managed on our own until now, and we will continue to manage. I understand. And if at any point I feel that you are trying to treat us like a charity project or as a weight on your conscience, it's over. I won't allow Sophie to be hurt. I completely agree. Carla took a deep breath. So, where do you want to talk? David felt a wave of relief. Wherever you feel most comfortable. Right here. Julia, can you stay with Sophie for a bit? We'll sit at that corner table. As they walked to the more secluded table in the bakery, David felt that his life was about to change once again. This time, for the better. The corner table offered relative privacy, isolated from the main flow of the establishment by a wooden shelf filled with jars of homemade sweets. Carla sat with her, back to the wall, a position that allowed her to watch Sophie playing with Julia at the counter while she talked to David. It was a habit developed over the years, always keeping her daughter in sight. "So," Carla said, crossing her arms over the table, "tell me about our family, the family I never knew." David took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. "Our father, John Johnson, owned a construction company. A strict, traditional man obsessed with the image of the perfect family. Our mother, Dolores, came from a family of bankers, always concerned with social appearances. And you? What was our home like?" "Large, cold." David paused, looking out the window. "Many servants, many rules, little affection. I grew up with nannies, then with Rose when she arrived." Carla felt a tightening in her chest at the mention of her grandmother's name. "Rose never spoke about you specifically. She only said she took care of a very smart boy in a rich family. I remember her as a constant and comforting presence. When my parents traveled, which happened often, Rose was the one who stayed with me. She taught me simple recipes in the kitchen, helped me with my homework." David smiled sadly. "She was more of a mother to me than my own mother. Rose was like that. She took care of everyone." Carla hesitated, then asked, "Our father, how was he with me when I was a baby?" David closed his eyes, forcing the memory. "Distant, but there was something in his eyes when Rose brought you home. A tenderness I never saw when he looked at me. At the time, I thought it was because you were a cute baby. Now I understand it was because you were his daughter. Did he? No, I was in the house. He did. And I think our mother also suspected something, but she never questioned it directly. Rose was too efficient to be dismissed over mere suspicions." Carla processed the information in silence. "And when we disappeared, it was terrible. One day you were there, the next the house was empty without Rose, without you. My father said Rose had been fired for suspected theft, that she had taken you away in the night." David shook his head. "I was 15, a rebellious teenager. I fought hard with them, said Rose would never do something like that. My father forbade me to mention the subject again." "And you obeyed?" "Yes," David admitted shamefully. "I was young, selfish. I was sad for a few weeks then. Life went on. School, college, work. Sometimes I remembered you, but I thought Rose had found something better elsewhere." Carla felt a pang of anger, but also understanding. "You were just a kid too. That doesn't justify it. I should have looked for you." "How? You didn't know our real names, where we lived." "I could have tried." Carla watched him closely. There was sincerity in his voice, a genuine regret she hadn't expected to find. "And your life after that? Tell me about Emily." David's face lit up slightly. "Emily is complicated, smart, stubborn, full of opinions about everything. She seems a lot like me at her age, which scares me." He chuckled softly. "Her mother left us when Emily was 3. She said she couldn't handle the pressure of being a Johnson wife, with all the social expectations." "And you raised Emily alone?" "Yes, with the help of nannies, private schools, all the structure that money can buy. But really raising her, being present, I learned through trial and error." Carla felt an unexpected connection. "I also raised Sophie alone, just without nannies or private schools." "How did you manage? I mean, how did you survive all these years?" "Working, a lot." Carla looked at Sophie, who was now helping Julia organize sweets in the display case. After Rose died, I felt lost. I was 19 with a 1-year-old baby and nowhere to go. Mrs. Julia helped me find my first job, then another, and then another." "What kind of work?" "Everything. Waitress, cleaner, babysitter, sales clerk, supermarket cashier." Carla listed without self-pity. "Currently, I work As a housekeeper at the Grand Hotel in the morning, clean offices in the afternoon, and cook appetizers for parties on the weekends. David felt the weight of guilt increase. "Carla, No," she interrupted firmly. "I don't want pity. I don't regret anything. Every job, every hardship taught me something. It made me stronger." "And Sophie? How did she handle all of this?" Carla's face softened. "Sophie is amazing. She never complained, never asked for things I couldn't give. She's mature for her age, responsible, caring." Her voice slightly choked. "Sometimes I feel guilty for her having to grow up so fast. She seems very happy. She is happy, but she deserves more than I can offer." "What do you mean?" "A better school, art classes, new books instead of used ones, clothes that aren't donations." Carla listed sadly. "Sophie has so much talent, so much intelligence. Sometimes I lie awake at night, imagining what she could become if she had the same opportunities as other kids." David felt his heart tighten. "What if I told you I could help with that?" "You already said you don't want charity." "What if it wasn't charity? What if it was just an uncle wanting to give the best to his niece?" Carla studied him intensely. "David, I need you to understand one thing. Sophie and I built our life on our own. We have our routine, our plans, our independence. I won't allow anyone, even family, to come in and change everything overnight. I don't want to change anything. I just want to be a part of it." "How?" "I don't know," David admitted. "I've never been in this situation before. I've never had to learn how to be a brother to an adult or an uncle to a child who barely knows me." Carla was silent for a long moment, watching Sophie laugh with Mrs. Julia. "You know what hurts me most about this whole story?" "What?" "That Rose died carrying this weight. That she thought it was better to hide us than to fight for our right to be family. Rose was trying to protect you. I know. But what if she was wrong? What if our father had changed his mind? What if—" Carla stopped, shaking her head. "It's no use thinking about what could have been. We can think about what still can be," David suggested gently. Carla looked at him, really looked, studying every feature of his face. "You have Dad's eyes," she finally said. "I saw a picture of him once, in Rose's belongings. You have the same eyes as him. And you have Mom's smile." Dolores smiled little, but when she did, "Was it like mine?" "Exactly like yours." They fell silent, absorbing the strangeness of the situation. They were siblings, but also strangers, family, but without shared memories, united by blood, separated by circumstances. "David," Carla finally said, "if we're going to try this, if we're going to try to be family, it has to be slow. Sophie is my absolute priority." "I understand. And it has to be honest. No half-truths or secrets. I've had enough of that for a lifetime." "I agree. And if at any point I decide it's not working, I'll respect your decision." Carla took a deep breath. "Then maybe we can try." David felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Carla, for giving me a chance. Don't thank me yet. We still don't know if it's going to work." But when Sophie ran to the table asking if she could show her drawings to Uncle David, Carla didn't protest. And when David carefully examined each drawing, asking intelligent questions and praising the little girl's genuine talent, she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. The look of a family member looking at Sophie with true pride. Maybe, just maybe, this could work. 2 weeks passed since the meeting at the Bella Vista Bakery, and David had religiously respected Carla's request not to push. He limited himself to appearing at Bella Vista 3 times, always at the time he knew they would be there, maintaining casual conversations and striving to get to know Sophie naturally. On this Thursday in April, As a light drizzle covered Maple Grove, David gathered the courage to take the next step. He stood in front of the rusty iron gate of an old house on Maple Street, checking the address that Mrs. Julia had discreetly given him. The number 847 was painted in chipped paint on the exposed brick wall. The house was small and simple, divided into 3 studio apartments that housed working families from the neighborhood. David climbed the 3 worn concrete steps and rang the bell for apartment 2, where a handmade sign read Carla and Sophie in colorful letters that had clearly been painted by the little girl. "Who is it?" came Carla's cautious voice through the intercom. "It's David. I know we didn't schedule anything, but I need to talk to you." There was a long pause before the door was unlocked. Carla came down the stairs wearing a faded pink robe over a nightgown, her hair pulled into a messy bun. It was 8 in the morning on a Saturday, and she clearly wasn't expecting visitors. "David, what are you doing here?" she asked, crossing her arms defensively. "I apologize for showing up like this, but I received a call last night about Emily, and I thought you should know." Carla's expression immediately changed from defensive to worried. "Is something wrong with her?" "Not exactly. Can I come up? It's a complicated conversation." Carla hesitated, glancing up the stairs where Sophie was probably still sleeping. "Okay, but we have to talk quietly. Sophie had a fever last night and managed to sleep only a few hours." The apartment was tiny, but impeccably organized, a living room that served as Carla's bedroom, with a fold-out sofa and a small television on a plastic table. The American kitchen had only the essentials: a 2-burner stove, a small refrigerator, a sink, and a few cabinets. In the only bedroom, David could see Sophie sleeping in a twin bed decorated with children's drawings on the walls. "Coffee?" offered Carla, automatically heading to the kitchen. "Please." David cautiously sat on the sofa, noticing how every inch of the space was being utilized. Books stacked neatly in crates, serving as shelves, clothes folded with military precision, and Sophie's drawings taped to the walls as decoration. "So," said Carla, serving 2 coffees in mismatched mugs, "what happened with Emily?" David accepted the coffee and took a deep breath. "She ran away from home on Tuesday. Came back yesterday afternoon with a group of friends I had never seen before. When I tried to talk to her about where she had spent the last 3 days, she told me she was tired of lies and wanted to meet the rest of the family." "What do you mean?" "Emily has always been very smart, very observant too. Apparently, she had been investigating some things about our family and discovered you guys." Carla almost dropped her mug. "How?" "Documents I left on my desk at home, old photos I was sorting out. She pieced it together and confronted our old babysitter, who confirmed that I had a sister. And now? Now she is demanding to meet you. She said she won't accept living in a family based on lies and secrets anymore." David smiled ironically. "I guess she inherited the stubbornness of the Johnsons." Carla sat beside him on the sofa. "And what did you tell her?" "The truth. That you exist, that I'm trying to build a relationship with you, and that, it depends on you whether she can meet you or not." "David, Uncle David," a sleepy voice interrupted the conversation. Sophie appeared in the bedroom doorway, wearing a unicorn pajama, rubbing her eyes and carrying a worn stuffed animal. "Hi, Sophie," David said gently. "How are you feeling?" "Better. The fever is gone." Sophie approached and sat on the sofa between David and Carla, naturally. "Did you come to have breakfast with us?" David looked at Carla, who nodded slightly. "If your mom allows—" "Of course you can," said Sophie excitedly. "Mom makes the best toasted bread in New York, right, Mom?" "Sophie exaggerates," said Carla, but she was smiling. "But I can make some toasted bread if you want." As Carla prepared breakfast, David observed the apartment more closely. Every detail revealed the love and dedication of a mother who worked miracles with limited resources. The curtains were made of simple fabric but were perfectly ironed. The furniture was old but clean and well cared for. Sophie's drawings on the walls were creatively framed using colored cardboard. "Sophie," said David, "your cousin really wants to meet you." "Cousin?" Sophie's eyes lit up. "Really? Really? Her name is Emily. She's 17 and she's very artistic like you. Does she draw too?" "Actually, she's studying photography and graphic design. She has a room full of cameras and computers." Sophie looked at Carla hopefully. "Mom, can I meet her?" Carla placed the toasted bread deep in thought. "Sophie, honey, it's complicated." "Why? She's our family, isn't she?" The simplicity of the question left Carla speechless. David seized the moment. "Carla, I know you asked to take it slow, but maybe we could arrange a meeting, in a neutral place, of course." "Where? At the bakery? With Mrs. Julia around?" "Emily is a good girl, just a little rebellious, like I was at her age." Carla flipped the toasted bread, considering. "What if it doesn't work out? What if Sophie gets hurt?" "What if it does work out?" David countered gently. "What if Sophie gains a cousin, a friend, someone her age who understands the value of family?" Sophie stood up and hugged her mum from behind. "Mom, please, I've always wanted to have an older sister." "She would be your cousin, not a sister." "It's almost the same thing." Carla sighed, serving the golden toasted bread on simple plates. "All right, but with conditions." "What conditions?" "First meeting at the bakery, with Mrs. Julia present. If Sophie feels uncomfortable for any reason, we leave immediately." "Agreed." "And Emily has to understand that Sophie is still a child. No trying to impress her with things we can't offer." "Emily is more mature than she seems. She'll understand." Sophie ate the toasted bread with enthusiasm, asking questions about her cousin. What she was like, what she liked, whether she had long or short hair. David answered patiently, happy to see the genuine excitement of the little girl. "When can I meet her?" Sophie finally asked. David looked at Carla. "How about tomorrow, Sunday morning, at the bakery?" "So early?" "Emily is excited too, and, well, I think she needs a family just as much as you do." Carla watched David feeding Sophie pieces of bread, noticing how naturally kind he was with the girl. There was something paternal in his gestures that reassured her. "All right," she finally said, "tomorrow at the bakery. But David—" "Yes?" "If this goes wrong, if Sophie leaves this meeting hurt, I don't want to try again. Understood?" David nodded solemnly. "Understood. But I have a feeling it will work out." Sophie clapped her hands, excited at the prospect of meeting her cousin. David finished his breakfast with a smile on his face, thinking about how he would tell Emily that she would finally meet the rest of the family. Meanwhile, Carla washed the dishes in the small sink, trying to control the mix of expectation and fear growing in her chest. In less than 24 hours, her daughter would meet a cousin whose existence was as new as it was surprising. And she, Carla, would have to learn to share Sophie with a family she was just beginning to know. It would be the start of something beautiful, or the end of the simple and controlled life they had built together. Sunday dawned with a timid sun trying to break through the dark clouds loomed over New York. David arrived at the bakery at 9:40 in the morning, accompanied by a tall, slender teenager with wavy black hair that fell to her shoulders and intense dark eyes that seemed to question everything around her. Emily Johnson wore a vintage denim jacket over a t-shirt featuring an indie band, ripped jeans on her left knee and faded, all-star sneakers. An analog camera hung from her neck, and she carried a leather backpack that had seen better days. At 17, Emily had that carefree beauty, typical of someone who didn't care about impressing anyone. "So, is this where you met them?" Emily asked, examining the faded yellow facade of Bella Vista Bakery. "It is," David replied, noticing the nervousness in his daughter's voice despite her attempt to appear indifferent. "Remember what we talked about?" "Dad, I'm not a kid. I know how to behave." Emily adjusted the strap of her camera. "I'm just curious." They entered the bakery and found Julia arranging the tables with her usual efficiency. The Italian woman looked up and smiled upon seeing David, but her expression turned cautious as she observed Emily. "Good morning, Mr. David. This must be Emily." "Good morning, Julia. Yes, this is my daughter." Emily approached and politely extended her hand. "Nice to meet you, Mom. My dad has told me a lot about you." Julia shook the teenager's hand, noting the firmness of the handshake and the sincerity in the girl's eyes. "Likewise, dear. Your aunt and cousin should arrive any moment now." "What are they like?" Emily asked, trying to mask her anxiety. "Sophie is a special girl, very smart, very caring, and Carla—" Julia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Carla is a strong woman who has been through a lot. Be patient with her." "I understand," Emily said, surprising David with her maturity. The bakery door opened precisely at 10 o'clock, and Sophie rushed in, wearing a light blue dress that was clearly her best outfit. Her hair was styled in 2 neat braids, and she carried a school folder decorated with colorful stickers. "Uncle David!" Sophie shouted, running to hug him. "Where's my cousin?" Carla entered right behind her, wearing a simple white blouse and a brown midi skirt. Her hair was loose, and she had applied a subtle touch of pink lipstick. David noticed that she had dressed up especially for the occasion, which touched him deeply. "Sophie, Carla," David said, "this is Emily. Emily, these are your Aunt Carla and your cousin Sophie." The first moment was one of absolute silence. The 2 teenagers observed each other with mutual curiosity, studying every detail. Sophie, with her 8 years and bright eyes full of expectation. Emily, almost an adult, trying to process the reality of having family she didn't know. "Hi," Emily finally said, bending down to Sophie's level. "You're much prettier than my dad described." Sophie blushed and smiled radiantly. "You're pretty too, and so tall. Is that camera yours?" "It is. Do you like photography?" "I don't know. I've never had a camera, but I like to draw." "Really? Can I see your drawings?" Sophie looked at Carla, who nodded with a smile. The girl opened her school folder and took out several drawings she had specially selected to show her cousin. Emily examined each drawing with genuine attention, making insightful comments about composition, perspective, and use of color. David watched the interaction with a smile on his face, noticing how Emily naturally took on the role of the older, protective cousin. "Sophie, these drawings are amazing," Emily said sincerely. "You have a lot of talent. Have you thought about taking art classes?" "Mum said maybe next year." Sophie looked hopefully at Carla. "It depends on our finances," Carla explained, slightly embarrassed. "I can teach her some things," Emily offered spontaneously. "Basic techniques like using different materials, if you don't mind, of course." Carla was surprised by the offer. "That would be very kind of you." "It's not kindness. It's family." The simplicity of the statement left everyone silent for a moment. Julia took the opportunity to serve coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for the girls, creating a more relaxed atmosphere. "Emily," Sophie said shyly, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "What's it like living in a big house? Like, do you have a room all to yourself?" Emily realized the innocence of the question and felt her heart tighten. "I do. It's pretty nice, but sometimes it gets really quiet, kind of lonely." "Lonely, but you live with Uncle David." "My dad works a lot, and I spend a lot of time alone at home." Emily looked at David. "Actually, I've always wanted to have a sister or cousin to talk to." Really? Sophie's eyes sparkled. I've always wanted an older sister. Then I guess we're lucky, Emily smiled. Carla watched the interaction between the two with a mix of relief and concern. Emily seemed genuinely interested in Sophie, but there was a glaring difference between the worlds of the two girls. How would Sophie feel when she discovered everything Emily had that she didn't? Emily, Carla said carefully, Sophie is still very young. I don't want her to feel inadequate or lacking by comparing her life to yours. I completely understand, Emily replied with surprising maturity. Money means nothing if you don't have a real family to share it with. I'd rather have a cousin like Sophie than all the photography equipment in the world. David felt proud of his daughter. Emily could be rebellious and stubborn, but she had a generous heart. Can I take some pictures of you two together? Emily asked, picking up the camera. Can I really be in real photos? Sophie asked excitedly. Of course, you're going to be my model. Emily spent the next 20 minutes photographing Sophie, teaching her about light, angles, and expressions. Carla watched, impressed by the patience and kindness of the teenager. David and Julia spoke quietly about how naturally the two connected. Adapter Soys, Isabella, Emily, Donna Julia, Mrs. Julia, Raphael, David, Carla, Rosa, Rose, Dolores Silva, Dolores Johnson, Itaim Bibi, Upper East Side, Campos, Westchester Emily, said Sophie during a pause in the photos. Can I ask you a personal question? Sure. What was it like growing up not knowing you had a brother? Carla thought carefully before answering. Lonely. I always felt like something was missing, but I didn't know what. Rose, my grandmother, was amazing, but still, I always wondered what it would be like to have a bigger family. And now, what's it like discovering you have a brother? Confusing, Carla admitted honestly. Good, but confusing. It's hard to learn to trust after so long taking care of just myself and Sophie. I understand. I also have trouble trusting people. Why? My mom left me when I was 3 years old. She just walked out one morning and never came back. Emily spoke without self-pity, as if it were an everyday fact. Since then, I've been afraid to get attached to people. Carla felt an unexpected connection with her niece. But you got attached to your dad. My dad is complicated. He loves me, but sometimes I think he doesn't know how to show it. He spent so much time working to give me a good life that he forgot to live that good life with me. David, who had been listening to the conversation, felt a stab of guilt. Emily was right. He had focused so much on providing financially that he had forgotten to be emotionally present. Maybe, Carla said softly, now that we are a family, we can learn together how to show love. Emily smiled for the first time genuinely since she had arrived. I would really like that. Sophie, who had overheard part of the conversation, approached Emily and held her hand. Emily, can you come here every Sunday to teach me photography and so we can talk? Emily looked at Carla, who nodded slightly. Of course, Sophie. Every Sunday. Promise? I promise. And for the first time in many years, both Emily and Sophie felt they had a real family. 3 months had passed since the first meeting of the cousins at the bakery, and Sundays had become sacred for the slowly forming family. The routine was simple, but comforting. Breakfast at Bella Vista Bakery, followed by walks through Maple Grove, where Emily taught Sophie about photography and composition, while David and Carla talked about work, dreams, and the little daily discoveries of being siblings. On this July Sunday, an atypical chill for New York made everyone huddle in their coats as they walked down Aspicuelta Street. Sophie ran ahead with the instant camera that Emily had given her as a birthday gift, taking pictures of colorful graffiti and stray cats wandering the neighborhood. Uncle David, look at this beautiful photo of the orange cat, Sophie came running, waving the Polaroid in the air to speed up the development. "It turned out perfect," David said, examining the composition carefully. "You're learning quickly from Emily." "She's the best teacher in the world." Sophie ran back to her cousin, who was adjusting the settings on her professional digital camera. David and Carla walked a few steps behind the girls, observing the natural interaction between them. Each Sunday, the bond between the cousins grew stronger, and Carla began to relax her initial defenses. "They get along so well," Carla commented, pulling her scarf closer around her neck. "Emily has changed since she met you guys," David admitted. "Calmer, more focused. I think Sophie has given her a purpose she didn't have before." "And Sophie? Well, Sophie has never had someone to look up to like this. An older female figure who wasn't me." They stopped in front of a small gallery displaying urban photographs. In the window, Emily and Sophie were fascinated by the black and white images of homeless people and informal workers. "They're beautiful but sad," Sophie commented, observing a photo of an elderly man selling flowers at a traffic light. "Art sometimes shows sadness so that people pay attention to it," Emily explained, "so that maybe someone will do something to help. Like Mrs. Julia does with me and Mom." "Exactly like Mrs. Julia does." David felt touched by the wisdom of the two girls, but was interrupted by the persistent vibration of his phone. He looked at the screen and frowned upon seeing Mariana, his secretary, calling on a Sunday. "Excuse me," he said to Carla. "It's from the office. It must be urgent for them to call on a Sunday." David answered and stepped away a few paces. Carla could hear him speaking in a low but tense tone. "What? Are you sure? When did this happen?" When he returned, his expression was grim. "Are you okay?" Carla asked. "We have to go back. Something happened." David called the girls. "Emily, Sophie, we need to go. Something important has come up." "Dad, did something bad happen?" Emily asked, noticing the tension on her father's face. "We'll talk at home. Carla, can you and Sophie can come with me? I think it's better if we're all together for this conversation." Carla felt a chill in her stomach. "David, you're scaring me." "Please, trust me." David's apartment in Upper East Side was a reflection of his professional success, spacious, modern, with large windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Sophie entered wide-eyed, slowly spinning to take in the high ceiling, designer furniture, and especially the entire wall covered with shelves full of books. "Wow," she whispered. "It's like a library." "Feel free to explore," David said distractedly, serving coffee to the adults while Emily took Sophie to see her room. Carla sat on the light leather sofa, clearly uncomfortable in the luxurious environment. "David, what was that call about?" David took a deep breath and sat in the armchair across from her. "It was about our mother, Dolores." "Your mother? I thought she died in the accident with your dad." "No. She survived, but she was in a coma for 5 years. When she woke up, she had lost much of her memories and developed early-onset dementia." David paused, noticing Carla's confused expression. "She's in a clinic specializing in Westchester." 3 years. "And why did you never tell me this?" Because she never asked about you, never mentioned anything about Rose or about an illegitimate daughter of my father. I thought maybe she didn't know, or that she had completely forgotten. And now she is lucid, completely lucid, for the first time since the accident, and she is asking to talk to me urgently. She said she has something important to tell about the family." Carla felt her blood run cold. "Do you think she knows about us?" "I don't know, but the timing is very suspicious, right after we started to reconnect with the family." Emily appeared in the room with Sophie, who was carrying a vintage doll she had found in her cousin's room. "Dad," said Emily. Sophie wants to know if she can keep the doll. I said yes. Of course she can, Raphael replied automatically, his mind still processing the connection. Mum, can I keep her? Sophie asked, hugging the doll against her chest. Yes, sweetheart. Carla looked at Raphael. Are you going to visit her? I think so, but Carla, I want you to know that regardless of what she says, nothing will change between us. We are family now. And if she knows something about our history that we don't? What if there are more secrets? Raphael considered the possibility. Then we'll find out together. If you want, you can come with me. To Brookhaven? Why not? Emily can stay with Sophie, or we can all go. Maybe it's time for all the truths to come to light. Carla looked at Sophie, who was showing the doll to Emily and making different voices for the play. The little girl was completely absorbed in her first experience in a wealthy home, marveling at each detail. I don't know if I want Sophie hearing more revelations about our family, Carla said carefully. Then I'll stay with Sophie, Emily offered. You two can go and I'll take care of her. It would be nice to spend some time with my cousin. Sophie looked up from her play. Can I sleep here with Isa? Please, Mom. Carla hesitated. The idea of leaving Sophie in such a different environment from their simple apartment made her nervous. Sophie would be fine here, Raphael assured. Emily is responsible, and I have a staff member who can help if necessary. Mom, please. Sophie clasped her hands in pleading. I've never slept in a big house before. Carla looked around the luxurious apartment, then at Sophie's hopeful expression, then at Emily's mature confidence. All right, she finally decided, but we go and come back the same day. I don't want to leave you for too long. When do you want to go? Raphael asked. Tomorrow, the sooner the better. I need to know what Mrs. Dolores has to say before I can move forward with anything. Raphael nodded. I'll call the clinic and schedule the visit for tomorrow morning. As he reached for his phone to make the call, none of them could predict that the conversation with Mrs. Dolores would reveal a truth that would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew about their family. The last secret was about to be unveiled, and this time it would change everything forever. The St. Michael Sanatorium, located in the mountains of Brookhaven, was an imposing European-style building surrounded by meticulously kept gardens. Raphael parked the BMW at the main entrance at 10 in the morning on Monday, after 2 hours of contemplative silence alongside Carla. Are you nervous? Raphael asked, watching Carla adjust her scarf for the 5th time in the last few minutes. Terrified, she admitted. What if Mrs. Dolores hates me? What if she confirms that we are a disgrace to the family? Then we'll face it together. Raphael held Carla's hand briefly. No matter what she says, you are my sister. That won't change. The reception of the sanatorium was elegant, yet welcoming, with burgundy velvet armchairs and landscape paintings on the walls. The head nurse, an elderly lady with white hair and kind eyes, greeted them with warm professionalism. Mr. Johnson, it's good to see you. Mrs. Dolores is very eager for this visit. It's the first time in months that she has shown interest in receiving someone. How is she? Raphael asked. Lucid, but fragile. The episode of mental clarity may be temporary, so it's important not to tire her too much. The nurse looked curiously at Carla. And you are? Carla Miller. I am family. Ah, yes. Mrs. Dolores mentioned she was looking forward to meeting the daughter of John. Come, she is in the sunroom. Carla felt her legs wobble. Dolores knew. She always knew. The sunroom was a serene environment, with large windows offering a view of the mountains. Mrs. Dolores Johnson was sitting in a wicker chair, wrapped in a blue shawl, watching the birds flying among the trees. At 72 years old, she maintained the elegant posture that had always characterized her, although her face showed the marks of time and suffering. Raphael, she said without turning, you brought Carla. as I asked?" "I did, Mom." Raphael approached and kissed Dolores's cheek. "How did you know I would bring her?" "Because I know you. Emmett, Rose told me in dreams." Dolores finally turned to look at Carla, and her eyes filled with tears. "My God, how you looked like your father when he was young." Carla stood frozen near the door, unsure how to react. Raphael gestured for her to come closer. "Come, my daughter," Dolores said softly. "I have been waiting 15 years to have this conversation with you." 15 years, Carla asked, cautiously sitting in a nearby chair. "Since Rose told me the truth before she died. She came to see me in the hospital 3 days before she passed away and told me everything about you and John." Raphael sat between the two women. "Mom, why did you never tell me anything?" "Because I was angry, very angry." Dolores closed her eyes for a moment. "During 40 years of marriage, I believed that John was faithful. Discovering that he had a daughter with our employee, well, it was a devastating shock." "And that's why you sent Rose away?" Carla asked, her voice heavy with emotion. "No, I didn't send Rose away." Dolores looked directly at Carla. "Rose left because she was dying and wanted to protect you from my anger. She knew I was hurt and jealous, and she was afraid I would take it out on you and Sophie." Carla felt the world spin. "So, you knew about Sophie too?" "Rose told me about your granddaughter, about how John was paying her expenses, about how he wanted to meet her but didn't have the courage." Dolores sighed deeply. "My husband was a weak man, Carla. Good, but weak." "Mom," Raphael interrupted, "why are you telling this now?" "Because I'm dying, Raphael. The doctors gave me 6 months at most, and because I discovered something terrible about our family that Rose never knew." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Carla felt her heart race. "What did you discover?" Raphael asked. Dolores slowly got up and walked to a small desk in the corner of the room. She returned with a yellowed folder. "I found this among John's belongings after the accident. He had hidden it in the office safe for over 20 years. She handed the folder to Raphael. "Read it aloud. Carla has the right to know the whole truth." Raphael opened the folder and found a paternity test dated 1999. His hands trembled as he read the heading aloud. "Paternity test. Requester John Johnson. Tested Carla Miller." "Continue," Dolores said firmly. "Result, the probability of paternity between John Johnson and Carla Miller is 0%. John Johnson is excluded as the biological father of the tested." The paper slipped from Raphael's hands and fell to the floor. Carla stood frozen, unable to process the information. This can't be right," she murmured. "It's right," Dolores said softly. "John took this test in secret after Rose told him that Carla was his daughter. He found out he wasn't her biological father." "But then, who is my father?" Carla asked, her voice almost inaudible. Dolores returned to the folder and pulled out an old birth certificate. "This is your mother's original certificate, Caroline. Rose lied about many things to protect you." Raphael read the certificate and felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "Carla, your maternal grandfather was named Johnson, Caroline Johnson Miller. And Caroline was a distant cousin of John. They were related." Raphael looked at Dolores, who nodded gravely. "Carla, you are not John's daughter. You are the daughter of Edward Johnson, John's younger brother." "I don't understand." "Edward was my brother-in-law," Dolores explained. "He died in a motorcycle accident in 1996, just months before you were born. John knew that Caroline was pregnant with Edward, but when she died in childbirth and Rose showed up with you, he assumed you were his daughter out of guilt for his brother's death." Carla and Raphael exchanged glances, trying to comprehend the magnitude of the revelation. "This means," Raphael said slowly, "that we are not siblings." "You are first cousins," Dolores confirmed, "first-degree cousins." "And Sophie?" "Sophie is Raphael's niece, but not John's daughter," Dolores added. "Rose lied to John about Carla's paternity because she knew he would feel responsible for his deceased brother's family. It was a well-intentioned lie that turned into a decades-long family confusion." Carla began to cry, not out of sadness but from relief and mixed confusion. "So, Dad, John wasn't really my dad?" "No, but he loved you as if you were. Edward was his favorite brother, and when he learned you existed, he wanted to care for you as if you were his own daughter." Raphael stood up and walked to the window, trying to process all the information. "Why did you keep this secret for so many years, Mom?" "Because I was angry at John for deceiving me, even if unknowingly, and because I was jealous of you, Carla." "Jealous? John gave you more attention and affection than he ever gave to Raphael. That made me furious." Dolores looked at her son with sadness. "Raphael, I'm sorry. I was a terrible mother and a bitter wife." Raphael returned and knelt near his mother's wicker chair. "Mom, that's in the past." "It's not in the past while you don't know the complete truth about your family." Dolores looked at Carla. "Carla, you are the rightful heir to Edward's fortune. He left a will and a bank account waiting for you for 27 years. "What?" "Edward was an architect like Raphael, but he was also a painter. He sold several works before he died and left everything to any child he might have. The money is in a trust fund waiting for you and Sophie." Carla felt overwhelmed. In just a few hours, she had discovered that her entire life was based on well-intentioned lies, that she was not Raphael's sister, but his cousin, and that there was an inheritance waiting for her. I need time to process this," she said, too, abruptly getting up. "Carla, wait." Raphael stood up too. "No, Raphael, I need to think. It's too much." She ran out of the sunroom, leaving Raphael and Dolores alone with the weight of decades of family lies finally revealed. Outside, Carla leaned against a tree and cried, from relief, confusion, and grief for the dad she never knew and never even suspected was her true father. The truth, finally revealed, was more complex and devastating than any of them could have imagined.